Yeah, somebody just really made me laugh about the Tom effect. You're probably referencing when I premiere a video. That was I'm a little bit Mr. Magooey. When I premiere a video, there's this really interesting YouTube graphic that's like a Trapper Keeper thing, and it does sound like the Tom Club. Hello, happy holidays, happy solstice, Merry Christmas. However you're celebrating or not celebrating, happy going no contact, happy all of it. How are you all out there? Can you hear me? Say something in the chat if you can hear me. Like we're good. I'm getting a meter feed on this. Hello from Germany. But seriously, I need your help. Can you guys hear me? Oh yeah. Okay, yes, good. Thank you so much. What do you guys want for the holidays? Lump of coal, peace of mind, new family, better connection with your inner child, healthy partner? Thank you very much on the sweater. New Mexico, North Carolina, neighbor. Yeah, where are you all from? So I've asked two questions. What do you want for the holidays and where are you from? You pick. Peace and quiet, absolutely. New family, sure. Some energy. Who said energy? Rachel. Absolutely. We could spend the whole night talking about that because just I spent so many years before I did any work on myself just in a fog of lethargic mess. It didn't help that I was smoking and drinking coffee like a fiend, but not sleeping well. Like all of that and eating really poorly. Toronto, a lot of people from North Carolina. Boston, an old neighbor. The chat goes by too fast. I feel like I'm a cat trying to catch up to the what? Ohio, Florida. Mhm. So energy, yeah. Like I just think that when I started to shift my childhood trauma beliefs, these things would start to get inspiring. Um and slowly but surely it was like a long process of kind of waking up that I'm still kind of figuring out at 45. I went to the gym today and the gym just kicked my ass today. But I'm realizing the more I go to the gym, the better sleep I get, the better energy I have. But it took me years. My idea of a good time used to be hanging out in a coffee shop smoking cigarettes for a weekend. That's what I would be doing right now if I was not having done all that work, probably. All right. All right. So how this is going to work, I'm going to answer your questions. I love the questions that you all submitted. And this is a lot like the format of my healing community membership, except we can all see each other. It's on a Zoom call. So I just love doing these things. I find that what I love about the questions is there's just patterns to childhood trauma within the question. So I might not have answered your question for some reasons that it was like that thing where there was like, I really appreciate the questions. There was just too many of them. Some of those questions are going to be more appropriate to be answered with in front of a therapist, not something that I can bust out here, but did my best on a lot of them. But the questions are just beautiful in the way that it's the good news is that this stuff is highly patternized. And like we all have almost the same kind of mom, the same kind of dad. We have different trauma, but the patterns of our intimacy problems and our triggers, they're so just literally patternized. That's both the good news and the bad news is we have to kind of deal with those patterns. But there's just a lot of relief and humanity going like, "Oh my God, I do that too," or "Wow, my mother-in-law is like that too." So you'll hear all this in these questions. All right. Florida, Atlanta, Knoxville, another neighbor. Italy? Ciao, welcome. Toronto. I'm a guy from Boston trying to say ciao. I probably butchered that. All right. All right. I love this. Okay, should I just dive into the questions and get this thing rolling? Cambridge, UK, Seattle. All right. I'm just going to bust into it. So we'll probably spend the next hour and a half just doing these questions. and I'll be checking in with you, the chat. And shout out to my friend who's going to be doing some moderating in the comments. So if there's anybody that is kind of saying stuff that is not too good or triggering or really inappropriate and disrespectful to others, they're good. It's going to be moderated, so there's some safety there. Safety first. I'm looking at another screen here. Okay. All right. Welcome. Hello, friends and folks. I see some familiar faces out there. I love seeing that. And here we go. Just going to dive into your questions. Let's see. And these are all anonymous. I'm not going to say what your name is. And shout out to my mother-in-law for my Star Wars mug. Any Star Wars fans out there? Did anyone see Andor? Andor blew my mind. That was so good. But I won't bore because some people hate Star Wars. So, but I'm into it. I was disappointed with Kenobi, but I really liked the Mandalorian, the Boba Fett stuff. All right. No one seems to be vibing on the Star Wars, Sona. What tea am I drinking? Oh, that's the question of the night. I'm addicted to it. It's from Trader Joe's and it's ginger turmeric tea. And I put 2 tea bags in there because I need strong tea. The worst thing, it'll trigger me by giving me a weak cup of tea. It's one of my triggers. Really. Anyway, okay, I got one person into the Star Wars. All right. Let's see. Diving into the questions, can therapy focused on childhood trauma trigger depression? Absolutely, it can. I know it's supposed to be easy. I know it isn't supposed to be easy, but my depression is creeping in for me, and it is life threatening when it does come. So absolutely, that can definitely happen. I wish I knew if I should somehow try to or take a break, or if I try to push through it. When I start my groups and we really start to look at the family system, these are childhood trauma groups. And unfortunately, I'm not taking any clients right now for those groups. I'm not running those groups, the groups that I have right now. But when we start that work, I tell everyone you're going to dip. And in the first 2 months of that, going to that group, your childhood's going to become very real to you. And that really kind of hits us in a real way. So absolutely, if you're working on your childhood trauma, you will experience some real feelings. I try to reframe it. And depression can be something that's like a trigger about when you mention if it's life threatening. But to reframe it a little bit is that you're just doing some archaeology emotionally, and you're going towards the feelings that we've all done a really good job repressing. But if we want to change, we need to go towards those feelings and somehow welcome them, even if it's a bitch, even if it's really, really hard. But what I would do with the therapist, I would come up with something called a safety plan. I would kind of come up with when the depression starts to affect your functioning, when it starts to make you anxious about safety, then I would really have a direct conversation with the therapist. But one other little trick to this is I find that depression is the body giving up and shutting down. But sadness that we feel when we think about what happened to us or what kind of families we come from, that's a little bit different. So it's a little bit of a different kind of quality. And in a way, like you might be confusing, and I know it sounds silly, but you might be confusing the sadness that is something that you're trying to move towards in this work with depression. They're not exactly the same. And as always, just a shout out to do some inner child work is to really honor your inner child's feelings and try to let them know that you're monitoring it and that you're got a good, strong adult in place because you are kind of going to therapy. Not kind of, you are going to therapy. So really, really great question. Next one. I accept that my parents are never going to be accepting of me, supportive, or in any way try to make this Christmas nice for me. So, why am I sitting here unable to function, feeling like the most disgusting human ever because they've arranged a night out with my siblings in a posh hotel on 2 of my only days off work and didn't invite me? Really hard place to be. And that part that is feeling like you're a disgusting human, couple things that I would reframe this. I would say it is your family who should feel disgusted with themselves for how they put you in a certain role, how they do things. or how they don't see you, or how they don't take into account what's going on for you. And the other piece is that our inner children really hold on. One of the last thing to go in healing is our inner child's kind of potential that they want from their family. The potential of, will they see me? Will they finally, inner children don't see toxicity. They only see, like, I'm the problem, and this behavior that they're doing is a reflection on me, that I'm the problem. So that's probably where that feeling of disgust is coming from. So in all of these, probably in all these questions, I'm going to recommend something called dialoguing. It is some is a there is an e-course on my website that is an instruction on how to dialogue. It's working with the inner child. I forget the name of the e-course, and I'm not just trying to sell something to you. It's just that's where what I'm referencing is dialoguing. It's on paper, left hand and right hand, non-dominant hand and dominant hand conversation on paper with your inner child, to try to change your brainwashing, try to, like, really try to form a good, secure attachment with yourself. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that I reference in this thing called dialoguing. It's like a major tool that I have in the model of therapy that I do. And if this was my client, I would really kind of I would guide the client through dialoguing with their inner child, and really get a sense about what the inner child believes about themselves in context of the family's behavior. And then I would validate that, because the inner child might say, I'm just a terrible kid. I'm not interesting enough to them. That's why they do this, kind of a thing, and validate those feelings. But I would also say to that inner child, you had to believe that growing up, because every traumatized kid thinks that they're the bad kid. And that's how, when we're kids, that's how we explain the crappy behavior in adults. And then I would have the person's inner child really write down that, you know what, it's so not true. They're just really kind of nasty people who don't think about us, and it's okay to be upset about it, but it's nothing that we did. They just need us to be kind of a scapegoated kid or whatever. So the reframe there is really that it's your family that should be disgusted with themselves or be ashamed of themselves. And I think that your feeling of disgust is coming from that usually it's coming from an old place, like, I'm a bad kid, that's why these things happen. So, really great question. Moving on. Hi, Patrick. Thank you for your work. You inspired me to start doing the healing instead of this spiritual bypass thing that backfired on me. My question is, how do I stop a trauma tornado? When you're pulled into drama and you are actually adding unconsciously to it, and has devastating results, as in the aftermath. Any tools to use? Yes. Excuse me. All right. So who relates to this one? Who relates to, you know what I mean? That your coworker, has a beef with the boss, and then you're all about it, or you're drawn into drama between your best friend and their partner, or, like, does anyone have a magnet to trauma or struggle with that? I did. I definitely did. I thrived on gossip and upset. It was almost like an addiction for me. So what I would do, some tools, is I would write down a little bit of a list in the present, like, say, in the last 5 years, what are the scenarios that you really got drawn into drama? Like that roommate and their girlfriend from 2 years ago, that coworker, that ex that keeps coming back into your life, on and on. Um, and create that kind of list, because we have built-in forgetters. If we're run by our inner child, it's a lot like, um, Groundhog Day, where there's not a lot of kind of waking up and learning. So that list of how and the ways that you're drawn into the trauma. Um, Another resource is to really, the most helpful thing about this stuff is the Cartman drama triangle. I did a video on this called Cheap Intimacy that I'm going to put in the chat. Oh, there it is. All right. Just make sure that doesn't start blasting. Cheap Intimacy. The Cartman triangle is victim, rescuer, perpetrator. I know many of you have heard about it. It's the best kind of formula to know that, it's a way to also check yourself that, am I being a rescuer for my toxic boss who tends to be a martyr, and my other coworker is a bad person? Because I usually just drive into the gossip and get into things. But it's starting to be like, to use that Cartman drama triangle as a way to kind of like, wait a minute, what's really going on here? So, and a lot of us have like, the narcissistic parent who is like, I can't believe you're coming to Christmas. You're breaking your mother's heart, kind of a thing. That's drama. And these families thrive on drama. Like the mother is the victim and the father is rescuing the mother by being shitty to you, and you are the perpetrator. So when we do a Cartman triangle, it's usually like kind of a gaslighting experience. We need to flip those 3 points to what's really going on is that the mother is the perpetrator and you're the victim. And you know what I mean? You can kind of, it's a little bit of reality testing. The third tool that I would use on this is really come up with another list of how your family engages in drama. And the way that in my family system, it would be like one of the parents would go to the kids and complain and parentify us and triangulate us. And we were welcomed into the paternal gossip and drama and mess of it all. And as we're kids, it's really, really seductive. Who remembers, and I know I'm taking a deep dive on this one, who remembers being 10 and wanting to hang out with the 15-year-olds? Who remembers being 15 and wanting to hang out with the 21-year-olds? Is anybody with me on this? So when we're developing, we all want to be welcomed into the upper echelons. So that's one way to come up with a list and think about when you were growing up, for the author of the question, what was some family drama? Does the family drama still go on? Do you know what I mean? Like if your sister is getting married and your mom comes to you and he's like, I can't believe what she's chosen about the guest and the things and that. Same thing. It's just drama. And I don't mean drama like in a flippant, oh, that's just drama kind of a thing. Drama is essentially someone needing a bad guy, there being a moral problem going on, and it's a way to have cheap intimacy between people. So really appreciate these questions. Good questions. How are we doing so far? What time is it? We're doing great. I'm doing great. Time wise. I'm doing great. Like such a great thing. All right. Moving on. I don't have much confidence that my inner adult is in healthy enough shape to take care of my inner child. I'm scared that I love this question. Everyone pay attention to this one. I'm scared that I will just behave like my toxic family as they were the role models for my adult. I would love your thoughts on this. I love the question. First of all, we all start out really on shaky ground. In my group work, it might take me 6 months to a year and longer. It does take longer to get somebody's inner adult to really step up and show up for themselves consistently and work on coping mechanisms and work on intimacy problems and work on being more direct and boundaries and all kinds of stuff. So a lot of this stuff is like a boot camp to get our inner adult in place. Most of us, when we start off, the inner adult is like a flickering fluorescent light that only pops on like 10% of the time. And gradually over time, we get more and more better at being that adult. So no pressure, no shame on yourself, or it's really, we all start off. Raise your hand if you feel like you're a mess and you don't have your adult in place. You're in the right place. So that's how we all start. We don't want to stay there forever, but so there's that. What I really love about the question is this says it all for me. I'm scared that it will just behave like my toxic family as they were the role models for my adult. So when I have a client starting to dialogue with their inner child and they say, I'm going to commit to dialoguing 3 times or 4 times a week, and then they only do it once, and then they go into a shame hole thinking that they're just a terrible, neglectful person because they can't connect with their inner child. That shame comes from, I really think my main theory in my work is that I think that 90% of our emotional and psychic energy is preoccupied with not wanting to be like one or both of our parents. So if you're a people pleaser and if you feel like saying no to someone is to be mean, you're most likely trying to not be like a narcissistic parent. If you want to state a preference about something for you and you go into a shame hole, you're most likely trying to not be like a parent that was all about themselves. Or even the opposite. You could have a very codependent shutdown parent, and you might feel like to mind your P's and Q's and take a submissive stance in some kind of situation, you might feel like you're being like your codependent mom and not want to be like that. So I think it takes up our inner child is mostly preoccupied with trying to not be like my parents. And you'll hear me joke every time in probably every one of my videos, I couldn't send a sandwich back because I didn't want to behave like my father would at a restaurant, to like really nail the waiter and be an asshole to the waiter. And you know what I mean? Like, and so it's like, I had a great strategy. I didn't want to be him. So I became super passive, which was equally as dysfunctional. Then I had to do some work around that. So why I really love this question is the person writing it is genius. I'm scared that I'll behave just like my toxic family. And it's not going to happen. It's just kind of a free floating, anxious feeling. Practice just simply being good enough. If you can dialogue or journal once a week for now, perfectly fine. These inner children, you're all here, and therefore you're much better than any of your parents. If you're showing up to stuff like this, raise your hand out there if your parents wouldn't touch this stuff with a 10-foot pole. You want to, mom, you want to go on YouTube and look at Patrick's live and talk about inner children and how we can change our behaviors and work on our triggers and not be codependent, not be narcissistic. My parents would scoff and balk at this stuff. Why? Why would you just work on your problems by yourself? Like, so you're already, all of you are in the clear about that kind of a thing. So really love that question. Hi, Patrick. I have a question about substance abuse. You said that you used to smoke weed every day. Is there any amount of substance use compatible with healing, or is abstinence pretty much required? I tend to, this is not universal. This is not, this is my opinion. I tend to not take clients on unless they have about 6 months to a year of continuous sobriety in some fashion. But there is kind of a chicken and egg thing that some people are like, the trauma runs the substance abuse. And you know what I mean? It's just, there are some situations, and there are some situations where people who are trying to be sober are on a maintenance medication like Campril or methadone would be tricky, but there are some newer opiate blocking or opiate kind of like kind of keeping the person buoyant, even sort of benzodiazepines. So you're not going to hear from me that I'm anti-med. You know what I mean? I think that meds is the right med for the right time for the right person. I don't think people should be on meds chronically unless they have a chronic situation like a severe organic mental illness, someone struggling with what paranoid schizophrenia, stuff like that. So, is there any amount of substance use compatible with healing? I think if the person is really doing like a harm reduction thing, and many people start this work and they wake up to the fact that they have an odd relationship with alcohol, but they're already engaging in the work, and the therapist that I'm training is like, they work with them sort of on that. So if there is any amount, it needs to be manageable and small, and the person is already really working towards some kind of program around recovery. If they're really slipping and sliding all over the place, and it's like, I get it, some people get to wanting to be sober and then they really start to feel like, I can't get sober unless I address the trauma. It's just a tricky thing that I don't really have super solid answers to, because it's so unique to each individual. So appreciate that question as well. Moving on. Patrick, my husband checked himself into a psychiatric hospital today. I'm sorry. Depending on what the doctors decide, he could be there for up to 4 days, and he will certainly miss Christmas, which is also my birthday. Happy birthday. So we had previously planned on spending the holidays with my birthday together. Knowing that I'm going to be alone and will probably start feeling abandonment issues, what are some ways that I can get through the next several days without spiraling into depression and anxiety? We live far from our families and don't own a car. What I would suggest, and you might not like this suggestion, I would try to not be alone. And one place where you can not be alone is to just jump on a Zoom Al-Anon meeting or something like that, 12-step meeting. A lot of people have strong opinions about that, but just simply to be around other people, even if your camera is off. You can just Google that and find some Al-Anon meetings or adult children of alcoholic. Even if you don't have an alcoholic parent, those meetings are kind of up the alley about what we're doing. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing that I would have you do is so your inner child, it sounds like to me, gets really triggered around abandonment, and you really need your husband present in your life to feel secure. That's not good for you, and it's not good for your husband. You probably are well aware, you don't need a lecture from me on codependency, but you can just, you probably know what that is already. I would really do some writing around and try to figure out how it's relevant to the childhood trauma that you went through. And also to find your adult in this is to really spell out the concrete ways that the abandonment that you experience and rejection you experience in childhood is not the same as your husband needing to get care for 3 or 4 days. And that really helps us get out of the trigger. It probably has to be repetitive. Like, again, little Patrick, like they're coming back in 3 or 4 days. I'm with you as the inner adult and really try to make some bonding going on that between you and your inner child. And if you don't like that language, I totally get it. It's really sort of the model of therapy that I kind of do. So I don't mean to say I'm not the expert on you like you are. So, but if you're asking me, and what I would do is sort of in my therapeutic role, is that's really what I would do, is to try to, for most of the stuff around our triggers, especially around our partners, how is our partner different than mom and dad growing up? How is our job? As shitty as our job is, and it really reminds us of our family system, how is it different than our actually family system? And that tends to get our adult in place. And if you can get your inner child through the dialoguing thing that I mentioned, if you can get your inner child to talk about how the situation is different, then you're home free, because it's the inner child, aka the amygdala, the limbic system part of our trauma brain, that is incessant on we're screwed, we're fucked, we're really not in good shape. So it's a really um I've been there, is what I'm trying to say. Really appreciate that question. I hope the answer was helpful. So good, moving on. We are blasting through these. All right. How can one reconcile wanting or needing to show appreciation at Christmas to family members when these are the same family members, unintentionally or not, have been the source of a lot of trauma and toxicity, and refuses to acknowledge or do the work? Um, how can one reconcile wanting or needing to show appreciation? Most of these questions are going to be framing in an inner child way. Is the inner child wanting to show appreciation is a helpful way to look at this stuff is there's the family we get, and then there's the family that our inner child wants. Our inner child is going to be constantly negotiating or bargaining or having wishful thinking and focusing on the potential of that family. Um, and it's not a good thing. So for our inner adult is to parent that inner child and try to really gently let them know that the family isn't safe, and of course they want a healthy family, and it's going to be a huge piece of grief. So the wanting and needing to show appreciation is, here's something that the inner adult can do. Your inner adult can do that appreciation if you're really stuck and you can't kind of get out of it or something like that, or if you have to show up to this family event, you can do it from a superficial place. Why I love this question is inner children. Let's just say that the inner child, because it sounds like to me the inner child is like wanting to show that appreciation. That just tells me that the inner child might have magical thinking or wanting the family to be different than it actually is. Let's say that the inner child was really hating that they have to thank Grandpa Fred for the weird gift that he, and publicly or whatever, like really hating that. I would say in both cases that your inner adult can do that from a superficial place without giving up any power. And that, I think, another question is going to be relevant to that. But to answer your question, I really think that it's the inner child is wanting there to be a kumbaya kind of moment. And that's a clue that your inner child doesn't get the toxicity of the family. So what your adult can do is just kind of play Mickey the Dunce and do a superficial, pretend it's a Yankee swap. Thanks, Gail, for the Starbucks card. You know what I mean? And whatever. And the adult can do that, but it doesn't mean you're either losing face or affecting your pride. but you can also do it from a place where the adult can show that appreciation if you have to, without it being like a grand kumbaya moment. We're a big happy family when you know that that's not true. Does that make sense? Do these questions make sense? It's a great, great question. Um, so really appreciate that one. Let's see. Patrick, I'm wondering, what is your opinion or experience on the concept of shadow work? I love Carl Jung and I love his archetypes on shadow work. And I think it's a lot of overlap with what I do with shadow work. I think it's great. I think it's wonderful to really figure out sort of the parts of us that we're not acknowledging. That's therapy really in a nutshell, not that other amazing YouTube. But meaning to make the unconscious conscious is what we're doing here. In the way that I'm doing it is just sort of saying, framing things in an inner child way, which is also the unconscious. The only thing I would sort of say is that, um, just be prepared for some maybe some rough stuff that might come up. Do you know what I mean? Like that you might not be prepared for. Or I think it's kind of one of those therapies that are sort of after some initial work in my mind, and this is not super set in stone, I'm not saying this from the mountaintop or something like that, but I'm saying, let's say like the person doing shadow work and they really figure out that a dark part of themselves, that they're embracing that. I think it's better to do that from a place where you have some prior experience in therapy, where you've kind of done some changing and that kind of a thing. Like I think shadow work, I would sort of, and again, I don't really know too much about this, so I'll probably stop there. But that's my only kind of a thing. But that's just a minor, minor caveat because I don't really know about it enough. It's just like shadow work. You could think about in like the way that I'm doing it. It's sort of like, shadow work is like a people pleaser figuring out that they're actually full of rage, which makes sense to me. But that's kind of a wild ride for a person who's 35 years old and been a people pleaser to figure out that they're really, really pissed off when people don't take them up on the people pleasing. Like there's another part to them that they don't really like to acknowledge. Hopefully that makes sense. Um, Next question. How do you navigate a flood? This is a powerful question. How do you navigate a flood of presents coming in from an abusive narc parent for their grandkids when you're no contact? Boy, oh boy. Um, Before I answer that question, every time I would get a new client who had children of their own, my first question would be, how are your parents as grandparents? And that's probably gonna be another long-term video that I'll do down the road. There's a whole piece to that, everything from, like, they're super gentle and kind, but they were never like that with me, or they're really like this the author of this question, they're experiencing manipulation through their own kids. So a flood of presence coming from an abusive narc parent. To validate, when I hear that, I usually see very narcissistic parents using the kids as an audience. And what I mean by that, the gifts are like a little message of like, don't believe your mother or father. They're wrong about us. And most likely they don't even know those kids very well in most scenarios. And this is a two-sentence question, so I could be reading more into it. How to navigate it is, um, this is going to sound weird, is I might give the presents away to Toys and Tots. Because I feel like there would be kind of like some kind of energy with those presents. And I would if the author is out there, no, I don't wanna really do that. I wanna keep this anonymous. Chances I would love to know about how the grandparents, do they even know those grandkids enough? So the manipulation and using is just like, um, winning over the kids and turning them, again, Cartman drama triangle. That they're the victims, and they're trying to rescue the kids with presents, and you're the perpetrator, to do that little bit of a formula. How to navigate it, if it was me, I would give the presents away and call it a day. I would not let the kids maybe see the presents. I would, because it's really in a way, if you've gone no contact with them, I would also say that your children, if you're not safe with them, your children are most likely not safe with them. And even if they're not like abusive now, for the narcissistic parents to not be real about what happened to you, that in my mind makes them not safe. And then that might be a hard bar for maybe many of you, but if you think about it, like um, grandma who's a narcissist is a relationship with her grandkids, and there's always little quips and snides. You know what I mean? Like, well, if your mother would just invite me to lunch, sometimes we would see each other more. You know what I mean? That's not safe. That's just icky and gross. I wouldn't want that around my kids. Does that make sense to you all? Am I just? It's a really tricky one. But yeah, for your own peace of mind, if the kids are young and it's just like stuff flying in from the place where we all buy gifts starts with an A, then it's just, and it's probably a bunch of crap. And it just might, to turn that nasty energy and to give it to a homeless shelter might turn into good energy for you or something like that. And I'm sure if you've gone no contact, the other thing is, just to really make sure you set boundaries. Don't send, or send them back. Here's when I this is the thing I don't want to forget. I really think that the presents are in the form, they're a direct FU to you. And I feel there's a lot of intent on that. So that's where that icky, sticky manipulation kind of a thing. F you, that you're going to cut me off and I'm going to make you look bad. It's very President 45 kind of a thing to do. So sorry to make this political, but just popped into my head. All right. Let's see. My parents are annoyingly anti-mask, even though my dad is severely weakened from cancer treatment. We're going over there the day after Christmas and plan on masking for our health's sake and theirs. How do I respond when they inevitably pay attention to this one? This one is for all of us. How do I respond when they inevitably make a snide about the mask? It happened in the past, and I fully expect it again. I love this question so much. Our inner children, um, we will give a lot of power to these little shitty snide comments, and we'll dread them. Raise your hand out there or put something in the chat like, you're gonna go see your brother at Thanksgiving or Christmas or something like that, and you're just like, he's gonna make the fucking comment about the hat that I wear or the shoes or the goddamn thing, and you're like tossing and turning on that. Does anyone relate to that? Spent most of my life doing that. They're gonna say this thing, and I'm going to say that, and we're having a fight in our head. And it's so, oh, it's exhausting. It really, really is. But my advice on this is, you can let mom and dad make those stupid comments and not give it too much power. I would even say to accept that they're gonna make those comments. But the thing that's at stake is those comments are kind of about the truth. I find that when the toxic family make those little quips, make those little sort of like, oh, someone had to park on the other side of the street because they didn't want their new car, blah, 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 like all that fucking bullshit or whatever. It's just in a way that it's provocative, but we don't have to let it be provocative. You can anticipate they're going to say it. And your adult can be like, oh, there it is. Cool. That's different than reacting to it. That's different than being like, oh, and you're trying to be just like, when you put more energy into it, the worse that it is. And here's what I really love about the question is my main advice is your parents with the quip, they can't take the truth away that you're right about the mask, or they can't take the truth away about how shitty it was for you growing up. So it's just in a way like this is from my mentor. She would sort of say to me like, Patrick, so what if your boss says that? And I go, what? Like, so what? He probably is. He's probably going to say those stupid things, but he's not the expert on you. He's just some wackadoo boss that you have. You know what I mean? But inner children were so focused on the personal, and we because of rage and shame, we can't stand it when it's personal. So I really appreciate that question. I really these are smart questions. Moving on. How are we doing on time? We're doing great. We can even slow this thing down. Has anyone got any good puns, any good dad jokes? Christmas? There's a Christmas song that's something like "Tales of the we'll sing" something about, like, "We'll sing scary ghost stories and tales of the glory of Christmas is long." Who tells I well, every time I hear that song, I'm like, where were the ghost stories when I was who does that? Is anyone with me on that? It was just like, like, scary ghost stories? Christmas? I don't know, like, I'm anyway, I'll get back to my question, so that the joke bombed. Um Let's see. Hi, Patrick. I feel that doing therapy for me is a trigger itself. So I'm really struggling to even start. I feel like I'm being dramatic and feel embarrassed to be journaling. How do I get over this hurdle? Probably not going to like the advice, but I would journal a little bit about, just do some writing about how the family would shame feelings and twist your normal feelings that you had as a kid into being dramatic or overly sensitive or there you go again kind of a thing. I would really wonder if that's there in the childhood. And if it's not, it might really be coming from a place of neglect. Latchkey kids, really strongly neglected kids, kids who raised themselves, kids who like made their own lunch in kindergarten. That neglect is a really powerful force on a kid because we're always guessing about where the bar is. So I think that it can be a neglected kid going, "Oh, I'm just being dramatic with these feelings," when you're having normal age appropriate feelings. Or the family has created a narrative about you that you're too sensitive or that you're dramatic. And to power through that feeling of it being embarrassed is just sort of the embarrassed thing is I get too. I think that that's what it must have been like as a kid to show up and talk about feelings in some way, because the parents were just probably really, really off about it, you know? It's like really the image that I'm thinking in my mind about the embarrassed kind of a thing is a normal 5-year-old is gonna come home with a drawing from daycare or kindergarten and show the parent. And when that parent really has an off reaction, whether of either disinterest or criticism or, nothing worse than having a shut down parent that's like, "Oh yeah, it's nice." You know what I mean? I wouldn't you feel embarrassed? Because kids thrive on that. "Oh my God, I love the colors that you chose. Beautiful." That's their security. That's their safety. That's what they need for healthy development. And I'm not saying, like, we totally need to cater everything to kids in that way, but I remember nearly everything that went on in my childhood, and those moments that I would go to show a part of myself or a drawing or that kind of a thing, it would be met with this, like, "Meh," you know? Would walk away feeling really shitty about myself, really, really, "Oh, why did I even think that they'd be interested in it? It must be a terrible drawing." That's kind of how this stuff works. So to answer this question, I would really just journal around how did that narrative that you have about being dramatic or embarrassed come from? And usually the two culprits in my mind is really being told that you're dramatic, told that you're sensitive when you're just a normal kid, or that it's coming from neglect and it's like just guesswork. So, really powerful question. Moving on, I've had a lot of heartbreaking experience with different therapists. So, I gave up on therapy and started doing my own trauma recovery work on my own. Totally get that. I've been able to make a lot of progress. Good. But most recently, in the last few months, I've been feeling a lot of violent impulses towards my family of origin. This is really scary for me, and I still live with them and will just for a little bit longer. I'm not open to therapy. I just think it would be very much potentially make it much worse. I could see that. And what are other ways that I can calm these impulses? The impulses, you're probably just freaking yourself out because you have a good, strong adult in place. And there's a huge difference for feeling violence towards somebody, feeling violence towards a perpetrator, feeling violence towards somebody in that way, and doing it. Those are huge, very human. And I think that there's really kind of a spooky elephant in the room is that if you've been abused by a perpetrator, who raise your hand out there. I really want this to be, to help the author of this question. Raise your hand out there if you were bullied by a kid in high school and you thought about bringing a knife or a gun to school, or you reached a limit and done that. I know I did. Thank God I never did. But those are some valid feelings when we're totally powerless and someone is humiliating us and doing all that stuff. It's, of course, those feelings are there. Took me years to get over, like, I'm sure many of you who thinks about that bully, like, once every couple months, and then gets into that, like, I can't believe it, gets into that, like, what would I do now if I saw them, or, all that stuff. These are just moments that have never been aired, and they never have their kind of day in court or get some justice. So to really validate the author of the question is, um, I would just reframe it as probably just justified rage, and feeling or image, like, just wanting to, like, really be violent. That is very different than doing it. So don't be freaked out that you sort of have those kind of things. And you'll be fine. You're almost as you'll be there for just a little bit longer. But I really think, again, coming back to what I said about 90% of our energy going into, am I like my parents? Because many of us, this is why people pleasers don't feel rage, because they don't never want to be like a mean or aggressive person in that way, when as a human being it's almost impossible not to. So really, really great because I also read into the question is, there's a lot of therapists out there that would be like, whoa, you're feeling violent towards somebody? You know what I mean? Like, oh, I need you to fill out a form. You know what I mean? Like, oh boy, this is scary and uncomfortable. And I get it. In many cases in society, that's warranted. I used to work inpatient psychiatry, and there was plenty of people, like the underbelly of the criminal world, that would end up in psych units, that we needed those parameters around somebody like that. But I don't think it's good to ever weaponize our anger. I think it's perfectly fine to feel it, but why I'm so opinionated on that is, probably everybody on this call right now grew up with parents that were either super neglectful or shut down, or they weaponized their anger till the cows come home. So it's hard, and not to take this to a dark place, but I think about folks who went through being sexually assaulted, and they're told, well, it's going to eat you up inside, so it's best to forgive. Do you know what I mean? I think it's healthier to, like, get the sexually assault victim into some kickboxing classes to be able to get, feel their body again, feel their power. And do you know what I mean? Like, I would never blame a sexual assault survivor to just not have feelings of violence towards a perpetrator. So really appreciate that question. It's a powerful question. So moving on, best way to respond to alcoholic estranged dad, who after 37 years sent me a card and wrote in it, still trying to find some time to get together. He's 81, I'm 55. His reply to my invitation to coming to my home for a meal previously has been, I don't think there would ever be a time I could do that. The childhood trauma part of me wants to fix him, but my adult logic tells me be done with him. Right. The question is, first of all, just to validate, like, that level of trauma is, hopefully this is not going to cause more pain, me saying this, is sort of like being an orphan, but then having the parent once in a while being like, oh, maybe there's a possibility. I think that's horrendous. And what I love about the question too is that you totally get it. The childhood trauma part of me wants to fix it and fix him. The adult logic tells me to just let him go. To reframe this is, I would sort of really find a really good therapist and start to look at letting him go through some grief work, rage work, childhood trauma work. And that reframe is a lot about how, um, inner children have a death grip on the potential of family. And the darkest night of my soul was when I gave up on that and went no contact with my mother. But before then, I was just like, we're gonna be a family. We're gonna make this work, and I think we all struggle with that. Most of us struggle with that, unless it's horrifically bad, and that wasn't part of our world even in our teenage years. So grieving is on two fronts, and this is from my mentor. Grieving the family we got and grieving the family that we didn't get. And I would think that the inner child is holding on for a tiny sliver of hope with him, and that's the last thing to go in healing work, is to really give up on him. So it's not like you do that up front. There's a lot of work that goes into. You can check out the Genogram course. You can check out the family rules. There's a letter to a bad parent in my membership program that you would do in an empty chair work with somebody. And those are all the things that I would help a client do, those specific exercises for them to really feel their childhood and really feel what their family is really like, because the inner child has a lot of rose-colored glasses. And you totally get it. You're like 80% there, and it's undeniably horrendous. Um, I think I think your father does more damage to you by connecting. I think at this point, the best thing he could do is to stop connecting with you and to do all that alcoholic, maybe someday kind of bullshit kind of a thing. So my heart breaks for the author of that question for a lot of these. So, um, yes, grieving the family you got, like that's your dad. You know what I mean? Like from far away, just sending a card, and then grieving the family that you needed, that having a father to really sort of show up in our life. We talk Mothers get a bad rap. We spend so much time in psychotherapy talking about our mom, but they're just 50% of the equation. And I mean that in sort of cisgender households and that kind of a thing. So, all right. How we doing on time? We're doing great. Could you give tips on how I can know better, or who is okay, I love this question. Could you give tips on how I can better know who or what is the motivator behind my decisions? The decisions that I make. It can be hard to tell whether I'm making a decision from the inner adult or the inner child or the inner critic. It is confusing. And then I would say there's this, I think it's a Buddhist phrase, something that I love. It's something like, is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? That's kind of a little bit of a formula to keep somebody in check about how they're communicating. But what I would do when you're making a decision is write down the decision and ask yourself, is this coming from a place of fear? And, that could look like, you're interviewing for jobs and you went on 3 job interviews, you really loved one job and the other 2 jobs were like, meh. And this is a scenario that I give for childhood trauma survivors. And then the first job you went on an interview, one of the meh ones reached out to you and said, we want to hire you. And then we're anxious because now we're hedging bets. What if the job I want doesn't get back to me? And I should just say, that I'm going to take this job. That's coming from a place of fear. It could also be coming from a place of shame. Like, oh my God, they put so much effort into doing that. They gave me a job interview and I don't want to waste their time. I should just take this job. And even though they're only offering me half the salary that I need, that's a decision coming from fear and shame. And a decision coming from the inner critic, be weary of if the inner critic is like being critical of self, like, oh, what a piece of crap I am for not taking this job immediately. That's kind of fueled by shame, but it's like, the other piece is to look at shoulds. So I'm rambling a little bit, but is it coming from a place of fear? Is it coming from a place of shame? Is it coming from a should? And if those things are true, you might really want to be thinking about, is the decision that you're making, is it serving you in your life? And is it serving your values? So in a way, like, I don't know, your estranged sibling is getting married, to remarried to their narcissistic ex. Do you go to the wedding because you're invited? Or do you kind of not go and protest? Tough call. I mean, if I was the therapist, that would be kind of like a session's worth of trying to figure something out. Is it coming from shame? Is it coming from fear? Is it coming from a should? And, in what ways, how will you, another question to ask is, how will you feel after you make that decision? I get a lot of, for a while they've stopped now, but there was a lot of like third party therapy platform people that would reach out to me and they would ask me, "We love for you to be an affiliate or you talk about like that kind of a thing." And I was new to this world of YouTube, and making that decision to not is I've always been, first of all, I've always hated third parties. It's just something about me. But had I sort of taken them on, I just think it would have been a bad move for my integrity as a social media kind of person, because I just want the messages to kind of be coming from me. The other thing is, I don't think, for the most part, I don't want to poo poo on all of it. I don't think third party platforms of therapy, like the middleman who links you with a therapist and then they're getting all the money and blah, 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 and divvying it up. Um, I don't think that that's good therapy, you know? So it's like making that decision. I had to kind of go with like, what do I really value here? You know? So that kind of a thing. Let's see. Great question on that. Um, Let me have some tea. How we doing out there? Looking at the chat. I got another screen over here and the chat moves over here, but then I have to manually kind of scroll down. You guys having a good time? Oh, thank you very much for the generosity. I haven't really been able to, but I see them. I'm just trying to focus on the questions. Thank you so much. Wow, super generous. Um, yeah, we'll just keep it going. What else? Let me drink some tea. All right. Is it wrong to contact the children of people you no longer talk to because of their abusive ways? I went no contact with some abusive family members, but I miss their children terribly. Very sorry. Any advice on how to rekindle a relationship with the children but not their parents? Is that even possible? This is also an issue that comes up in this stuff. I would say, depending on the age of the children, I think if they're somewhere in the ballpark of 16 or 18, I think it would be okay because they're approaching adulthood. Anything earlier than that might get yourself into some hot water emotionally. I don't think it's bad. Like if this is your nieces and nephews or something like that. But you have to think about it from the other side, in that it might be really misconstrued as manipulation. And there is a heartbreaking element to this, is say, let's just say that this is your sibling's kids and you know that your sibling is somewhat abusive or traumatized or something like that, or they're caught up in the family drama. And what I tell clients, or people asking similar questions, is be the resource from afar. And coming back to Star Wars, Obi-Wan Kenobi was almost sort of protecting Luke Skywalker from afar. He was not in his life. He was just kind of keeping an eye on him in exile. And then when the time came, when Luke was old enough, then he felt it was probably time to kind of, make an appropriate connection with him. The psychology of Star Wars. But it's the weird analogy that I have, and it's heartbreaking because you might really love these kids, but you might have to really just wait until they're older to rekindle, because I would want those kids to have a sane, healthy person somewhere in the extended family, that they can have a resource. Now, the other thing too is, like, if they're 10 and 11, they might be totally loyal to mom and dad. They probably are. Even at that, even when I was 10, like if someone else came along and said, like, if you need to talk about your parents, I just would be like, I'm fine. you know So the other piece to it too is, like, the kids are smart, but also kids get caught up in loyalty. Does that make sense to you all out there? Does anyone relate to that? Like, you're 10 years old in the middle of a divorce and you're either team mom or team dad, that kind of a thing. Um so yes, really appreciate these questions. That's a tough one. Moving on. I often find myself reacting to being triggered when I come in contact with a rude, aggressive person in public, let's say a cashier at the store, someone in public whom I've had no personal affiliation to, I know I'm no anomaly with this, and I fundamentally understand that this is my inner child acting out. However, I appreciate hearing your take on some techniques and approaches on how to respond to people in a healthy way. I look forward to the day where I'm not even phased by this type of behavior any longer. Well, I relate to it. I would, strangers would just. I remember I could get into it with a stranger if they were acting out at a restaurant. I would have this like superhero kind of protective thing. Wasn't good for me, and I would do a little bit of, it's your inner child, but do you know how it's relevant to your family system? Where is, as childhood trauma survivors, to overly simplify us, many of us are fighters and our energy goes up. Many of us are tend to shut down. Many of us tend to be sort of people pleasing and a little bit sort of on the submissive fawning end. I'm not sort of saying in that in the negative way. It just, both are actually really amazing strategies that we come up with kids, and both take up an equal amount of traumatized energy that keeps us stuck. So they're not, one is not morally wrong or right than the other one. For those of us who are fighters, a lot of rage work would be helpful. Hitting a pillow, with there's these Nerf bats that you can buy on. They're toddler Nerf bats. You can hold them with one hand. They're almost like, if you were my generation, it's like the caveman bat from that cartoon. But they're foam baseball bats. Hitting a couch, hitting a bed, but being vocal about, not about the cashier, not about the barista or the person bothering the barista, but about how the family would do similar things. So there needs to be some investigative work around, where does that fighting, protective, ragey anger kind of a thing, or, and I, I'm probably very much a lot like the author. Like, I would take things so personally, or I would feel like someone has to say something, and in a nanosecond, I'd be in it with somebody at the DQ or something like that. And it just tells you that I was just sort of brimming with rage. Here's what's also tricky about it. It's not like I was like, simmering with rage 24/7. It's there, but I was highly dissociated from it. But it would come up when someone would be like harassing the barista, and then I felt like I needed to go into Superman mode. Does anyone get the dissociation kind of piece? It's the same thing with sadness, you know what I mean? Like, you're minding your own business, and then you're a sobbing mess at a Hallmark card commercial. It just, boom, there it is. So, I like that it's your inner child acting out, but I would say to really be thinking about a couple things. When you're out and about in the world, that, or in the world in general, that people are assholes and they're gonna do assholey things. And whether you get into it with them or not doesn't really make a big difference. But know that your inner child is in a narrative about bad guys, about people who are thoughtless and oblivious. They did a whole video on 6 unknown childhood trauma, like that. That's that thoughtless and oblivious stuff. Someone who doesn't hold the door open, someone who doesn't tip the waiter. Do you know what I mean? And you see all that happening. You know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff. So it's really about thinking about, how is the family thoughtless and oblivious? How are people like really jerks to each other in that family system growing up? That's where the energy is coming from. And it's not about the present, which is really, it's really hard to get out of it in the moment. But it's almost like practicing. And I think as humans, we all have that, we all have those fantasies until they kind of go away. I think the more work that you do, you become less and less interested, um, at when when someone doesn't put their shopping cart back at the supermarket. Anyone get enraged about that? That's the one I kinda get. I don't really have that one personally, but that kinda stuff, and I'm not trying to make fun of the author in any way. This is you're singing my song. I'm just kind of saying the ways that our inner child will get activated to injustice. people being immoral, that kind of a thing. Um, Moving on, great questions. How do you move past arguments with family that always wants to sweep everything under the rug? They demand that I need to apologize. I was out of line. That's where I have the need for fairness. I recently told her that she's toxic, and she said, "Yes, I ruined your life." Thank you so much for the generosity. Instead of apologizing for the one incident I brought up, I want to cut my mom and brother out like I did with my father. The father was a clear aggressor, but my mom was a codependent dynamic that ignored a bunch of trauma. Is that fair to my newborn son? Every time I spend time with them, I'm triggered. I've healed. However, it's really difficult not to fall into the same behavior. Like with the last question, um, I really appreciate these questions because all those patterns that I mentioned earlier. One pattern is, and I would really love to see some engagement in the chat on this. Some people don't take their family on and they're just, I'm out of here. I can't do this anymore. Some of us really get into it with our family. And I did that initially when I first started my treatment. I was really demanding. I would really go, because I'm curious about, and I don't mean to ask from a judgmental place, is I would say, you recently told her that she's toxic. And she said, yes, I've ruined your life. In some ways, how do I explain this? As a side note, I get questions when sort of say, Patrick, I love this video. What do you think about me sharing it with my mom? And my reaction is like, "Effing don't." Your mom has had plenty of opportunity to get this stuff anyway, but the sharing of the video or the creating of the you're being toxic or that kind of a thing, if you're gonna do it, just do it once, but don't keep trying to get them to get that they're toxic. That's actually what makes them toxic is their inability to get that. So I just wanna really sort of point out that many trauma survivors are trying to battle with their family to make that family the family that they need. And I know it's not really great to hear, but we really have to look at that. That's part of our inner child's rage and codependency and wishful thinking. Um, and I'm saying this from experience. I almost try to berate my mother into not drinking. And I did that for quite a while until I really realized what was going on. And people were like, Patrick, you need to go to Al-Anon because you're trying to control the uncontrollable. So, but to come back to the question, how do I you move past arguments? I guess my answer is you don't have arguments with a toxic family. You're not going to move past them. Do you know what I mean? It's always going to end up in a cross-eyed, confused, messy, up the ante, kind of a thing, like your toxic mom, and well, I guess I ruined your life, like all that stuff. And the other question is that fair to my newborn son? Um, I want to cut my mom and my brother out like I did my father. Um, I would have to know. No, I think I know enough. That is it fair to your newborn son? I regarding going no contact is I think a lot of people get caught. You might have a newborn, you might have a toddler, you might have a 5-year-old, and the anxiety, which I totally get, is something on, well, if I cut my mom out, I'm denying my 5-year-old a grandmother. That's a really, really hard place to be, and I get that. That's a really, but if they're toxic to you or abusive to you, or you need space from them, I think it's healthier modeling for our children to model that, because it's just, again, if they're not safe for you, like they're not safe for your child, given that sort of need of self-respect and that kind of a thing. Another way to look at that is it's a lot like if I hear a couple say, we should get a divorce, we're totally unhappy, we haven't, we're just not good for each other, but we're staying together for the kids. And I would just kind of challenge that couple to say, I think that that's really not good modeling, because you're modeling to your 7-year-old. That 7-year-old probably knows you're really unhappy with each other, but you're modeling, you just slug it out for somebody else. When I think that that 7-year-old would need to see the people sort of go through the heartbreak and the break, and then create new, healthier relationships and live our life that way. Coming back to Carl Jung, um, he said one of the most powerful things that affects a human being's depression is the unfulfilled life of their parents. Going to say it again. One of the most powerful things that affects somebody's depression is the unfulfilled life of their parents. Raise your hand out there if you wanted one of your parents to get out of the marriage and live a happier life. Who wanted their mom or their dad to have a life? Who wanted to see them happy? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a huge part of trauma is just seeing who had a parent out there that was miserable. I had a drunk parent and I had a miserable parent. And they got into this marriage power struggle. They're just going to beat the crap out of each other until the other one changes. Good times. I just wanted, even as much as I hated my dad, I think like, like put him on a mountain and make him a hermit and have him get a dog. I think he'll be happy, so that unfulfilled life is children are like the canary in the coal mine for that stuff. So I went deep on a rabbit hole on that one, but I hopefully I've answered the question and did some justice to that one. Moving on, how do you feel peace, especially around the holidays, knowing that you don't have a family? A lot of other people do. I want to honor the question because as childhood trauma survivors, um, I kind of joke about it now, but when I was in the middle of my first round of a childhood trauma group, we working, waiting tables, and let's just say a holiday was coming, July 4th, Memorial Day, Thanksgiving, whatever. And my coworkers, the conversation about what they would do on the holidays, and one person would be like, "Oh, for the 4th, my mom rents a we do that. My whole family gets together. We rent this big cottage on the Cape, and all the grandkids come, and we do like lobster bakes and bonfires, and we look forward to it every year. We do games with the kids, and my dad has a boat." So that's why I need you to cover my shift, Patrick, for the 4th. And they'd be like, "What are you doing?" And I probably have to lie because I was in the middle of a cutoff, and it was just, it's just like, even if my family was to get together, like, well, we would not plan for the holiday and we would just kind of drink the holiday away and like fight with each other. And it'd just be like a miserable kind of, but to answer that person's question, I would be like, I would have to lie. I'd be like, "Oh yeah, I'm just going to maybe go to New Hampshire with some friends or whatever." But the reality is I was so estranged from my family and cut off and not knowing how to live that I would just be smoking cigarettes in a coffee shop on July 4th. But the grief and a bit of jealousy, to be honest, for that person who was going to go to that's a certain type of loneliness. Does anyone get that? Does anyone understand what I'm talking about? Like that kind of loneliness if you've gone no contact, or you come from like one of those chaotic, dysfunctional families. It's really hard to sit down in senior year next to a kid who's going skiing with his family that weekend. It's really a shameful, sad experience. So I just want to, that's part of childhood trauma. It's not what we would have chosen. None of that is what we would have chosen, but it's just like, that's the kind of, what are you doing this weekend, Patrick? It's like, it's pretty brutal when you're in the thick of it. But to answer the person's questions, how do you feel peace, especially around the holidays, knowing that you don't have a family? A lot of other people do. I would say two things. I would say celebrate that. I don't know what the author's scenario is, but if you don't have a family around because of going no contact, celebrate that it's better to be alone than to be abused. It's not a great celebration, but celebrate if you've made choices to not be abused, try to celebrate that. And then the other hard thing is join a group, join my monthly community, be around other people, be around fellow people trying to recover from this stuff. The worst if you're just isolated. It's just the worst. If you're not connected with anybody, join some Al-Anon, find and build a new family. It's just that's really kind of what I had to do. I was like sort of taken in by strangers. 12-step became my family. My group members became my family. Friends along the way that became my family until I really built my own nuclear family of my own. The loneliest was the beginning of all that, and it gradually got better and better. And I started to really just experience some real connection and joy when I would go to like potlucks or like 12-step barbecue kind of things, or my favorite part of being in group therapy for 4 years when I was like 20 years old, when we would go out for coffee afterward. And that was really the first time I had a sense of like camaraderie with people that had shitty parents too. Cause it was the only time that I was ever not pretending I was healthier than I was. So that's kind of the recipe for that kind of a thing, to celebrate it. But I want to challenge everybody as best as you can to try to build some kind of community, because um it's just, we're never gonna, the other thing on this is we're never gonna fully assimilate. Let's just say that I married that person who had the Cape Cod house and whatever. I'd still be hiding the shame of my family. So we're also never gonna find that perfect partner and assimilate into their life, and that's gonna kind of we still need to deal with our story. I know that you're not asking that. Doing great. Let's see. Thank you for all that you do. You're welcome. I recently have had to take a break from EMDR and ART because whenever I got close to my rage regarding childhood trauma, I would dissociate. I'm a fawn freeze person. We are working on skills to approach and befriend the rage within windows of tolerance. Good, but it has been very difficult. Do you have any tips on how to work on doing this and feeling safe, feeling something that you've been so punished for feeling historically? So, yes, I have. What might help is to do a little bit of writing about, because in that last sentence there, do you have any tips on how to work on doing this and feeling safe, feeling something you've been so punished for feeling historically? So I'd really do some writing on how the family wrecked, and I want you to use that word. How did the family wreck you feeling anger? Most likely we are all shamed for feeling justifiable anger. Like, even, even when you're 4 and you got a sibling, like, it's like they're going to piss you off. But the shame-based family is like you're bad for feeling that. So it's something that a lot of us go through, but some more than others. There can be more mind effy stuff that goes along with this. So to really do some writing on what would the family, another a good way, a good lead in is the journal prompt of like, what would your family say about you getting mad in therapy? You know, I can answer that for you right now. I know my mom. I'm not in contact with my mom, but I know my mother really well. She would just be like, sort of like, oh, you think you have anger? What about my anger? What happened to me throughout all those years? You know what I mean? So it's like I would feel ashamed that my anger wasn't as great as my mother's. And that's just, even that whole little that whole little vibe tells a big story. Or anytime that I tried to hold my mom accountable, like, Mom, you said we would go to the store so I could finish my science project before it closed. My mother would freak out on me. I'm doing my best, blah, 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 blah. But in a way, she was just getting out of any kind of accountability. So any frustration and rage in that way that I would have, it would have to go underground. So I would also befriend the fawning, because when you felt your normal, God-given emotions and the family tampers that down, you had a good strategy to fawn and freeze. So to write about how the family wrecked you getting mad, and then to do some dialoguing, that non-dominant hand, dominant hand thing that I mentioned, and really get it from the horse's mouth about what does your inner child believe about getting mad. And they might say, I'm just like dad, or I'm a bad kid, or I'm selfish, and I don't want to get mad in front of the therapist because they're going to say that I'm bad. So like all that stuff might be kind of like running in the background, all this, and shutting down. And this is kind of like one of the really tricky things about doing childhood trauma work. Then in I'm not a big fan of IFS, but there's this cool idea called the protector. So in my world, it's really the inner adult, the inner child. The inner child it can show up in various different ages, and that can be confused with like various different parts, like an IFS. But IFS is this thing called the protector. So it might be like your inner adult is sort of saying, okay, it's time to do this work. And the inner child might be a little bit exiled over here. But when the adult goes to say, okay, let's like feel this anger and do this thing with the therapist, the protector is going to maybe swoop in, shut your system down, and saying, no, I'm not going to give you access to your inner child. So you might, when one way to kind of, you can even dialogue with the protector and kind of say, hey, I need you to, like, I really appreciate you being protecting historically and not allowing anyone access to those feelings. But we have some work to do, and they'll be okay if I do this work. So there's this really neat other element. I think of the protector like a trap door. It like opens the minute someone's trying to get access to a very deep sort of feeling. That's just an idea. I'm not saying that all of these stuff is like written in stone, but in a no way am I an expert on IFS. I just know that little sort of part of it that I think is pretty cool because I see it with my own clients that if I ask them maybe a question in dialoguing or in person, they just might um, clam up. They might cry from one eye, which is a sign that they're really sort of constricted affect, fawning and freezing. And they just might kind of go, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. That's just more of code for like, can I leave now? That I don't know, or something like that. So hopefully I've answered that question. Let's see. We got a good like 15 minutes to go here. Why does all right, this question is a little I'm going to give like a curveball answer to this, and I want you to pay attention to this question. Why does my husband's mom gets triggered every Christmas? It's always something. This time she's trying to turn everyone against her own daughter because the sister-in-law accidentally told her the wrong time for my nephew's Christmas play. Instead of saying, I'm disappointed to have missed it, but I'll still come today and spend time with you, right? She blew up at her and said some unforgivable things just to blow off steam because she was angry. Now she's calling my husband and even my sister in law's mother in law to make sure they get her version of the story. Okay, everyone pay attention to that. Put it in the chat. What's going on here? Why is she going to other parties to make sure they get her version of the story right? What do we got so far? Drama Central, emotional punching bag, triangulation. Good. Drama triangle. Right. You know, there's really folks behaving in a very and this the husband's mom, she just might be classic CPTSD. She might have some characterological problems, aka cluster B symptoms. She could be narcissistic, she could be borderline, she could be something else. But what I want to focus on is something really powerful here is that the mom, and we're not done with the question yet, the mom is now crossing boundaries to make sure that she has allies elsewhere. So it's a lot like the question earlier about the grandparents sending the Christmas gifts. And what I find something pathological, cluster B symptoms, is when the crossing of the boundaries, like the grandmother going to the grandkids, those grandkids just might be anonymous kind of supply. They just might be an audience member, not an actual person. It's a little bit kind of tricky. But now she's calling my husband and even my sister-in-law's mother-in-law to make sure they get her version of the story straight. Is she's crossing boundaries, going to people that she doesn't probably really know all that well and using them to justify herself. It's not a it's a big red flag that tells us there might be something else going on underneath. So moving on. So now instead to move it to the same question. So now instead of spending Christmas with her family, she is alone because she's alienated her kids. Right. She's acted out, which makes her further the victim to everyone else in the toxic family. Now there's even extended drama who eat who eat up her version and call my husband to say he should drop everything and go over there. Now she needs a rescue. We got another solid flag about some cluster stuff. And I'm don't know this person. This is just stuff off the top of my mind. Again, it could be cluster B stuff. It could we could even just have simply someone with a very complex post-traumatic stress disorder history behaving like this way. There's a lot of overlap. But there's things that now Here's what I would sort of it's a mess. I don't understand why the holidays make her so crazy. Maybe that's the actual question. If the husband went to the mom and went to her place, and I think it would be healthy if the husband went and confronted the mom. And here's what the question when it comes to this characterological stuff is to sort of to say to the mom, "Well, hey, how did we get here? What happened?" "They didn't tell me the right time because they don't like me. They don't like my deviled eggs that I bought 7 weeks ago. Even though I drove like slave hand and foot and drove 4 hours to get them, And it's just, Mom, how do we get here? The mom's not going to be able to give that answer, but Mom, how do we get here? You acted out. You freaked out on people that you barely know. It was really, you lost control of yourself. I didn't, blah, 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 blah. Channeling my own mom here. But that, how did we get here, isn't a question for the mom. It's more of a question for the family. If the healthy people in the family were like, well, hey, everybody, how did we get here? Oh, yeah. Gail freaked out on everybody. And then she started dropping F bombs and started making huge accusations that weren't true because there was just a communication drop. That's how we got here now. Not because that mom was right to feel slighted and she was justified to freak out on people and be verbally abusive and that kind of a thing. So that thing about like, how did we get here is a reality test question more for you. But to answer the person's question, I was a little bit, this part of it, it's a mess. I don't understand why the holidays make her so crazy. I would say don't get wrapped up in it being the holidays. This is probably not new behavior unless she's just massively triggered around the holidays as CBTSD. But in the way that she's behaving, I would want to hear more, but it sounds so cluster B or characterological. But again, that's me not knowing the person perfectly fine. So I would be erring a little bit more on that side, but it could simply be I would want to know, like, is this the only instance that this person sort of does this? Probably not if she can go there, if she feels that kind of self-righteous and paranoid and all that kind of stuff. So powerful mess. It's but who's familiar with that kind of mess? You know what I mean? Who lived in that kind of stuff? Drama, drama, drama. Okay. Can you share some healing techniques to calm our triggers? What helped you when you were struggling and how did you cope? I was in a group with like-minded people. I was dialoguing with my inner child. I was starting to develop a relationship with my inner child. I was letting go of negative coping strategies and I was starting to practice Reiki on myself, which was, I'm not suggesting everyone do Reiki, but something tangible that you're learning how to do that isn't just like journaling or looking at a book on affirmations. IFS is internal family systems. It's a type of therapy that involves all of our different parts and becoming securely integrated within ourselves is the best way that I can describe IFS. So coming back to the question, um, concrete things that you can do to like calm your system down. Vagus nerve stuff is really blowing my mind right now. Exercises where you kind of, you the vagus nerve is a nervous system that runs through here, and there's exercises like you turn your head one way and look your eyes in the opposite way. Then you feel a yawn come on, and it kind of resets your system. um, Things that you are literally doing that are not just cognitive things like reading or something like that. Um, what helped you when you were struggling? So it's funny. I kind of have a love hate relationships with healing techniques because I find a little bit, and this might be naive of me to say, sometimes I feel like therapy only offers the coping, but not the healing techniques. And the healing techniques don't work for everybody. I couldn't meditate until I did some heavy duty trauma work to turn all that trauma noise down and do some catharsis stuff and that kind of a thing. So I'm just trying to say it bothers me when a therapist is sort of like, "Oh yeah, I could see why you get so triggered." It would be helpful if you practice mindfulness and breathing and meditation and yoga, you know, and DBT skills. I'm not poo-pooing these things. I think that those things are genius. But I'm just kind of saying it can't be all of that. So really, like, what would calm the triggers is, to be blunt, is to do some real cathartic childhood trauma work, to find that EMDR person, or to find somebody who knows what they're doing around childhood trauma. Because otherwise, it's almost like we're just doing maintenance on our system. Is anyone jiving with what I'm sort of saying here? I love this, but I feel like I'm usually doing Zooms where I can see everybody. Um, so, but what helped you? It was dialoguing. It was doing some Reiki on myself, where I was literally doing something physical on myself, practicing to calm my system down while listening to music. I would allow myself to do that for 30 minutes. But again, like, I was going to a weekly trauma group where we were doing some pretty deep intimacy work around childhood trauma and experiential therapy, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Deep, but to further, DBT skills are great. Finding really what works for you. Literally, like, what helps me just emotionally every day is doing something physical. I play drums. I've never walked away from my drum set in a bad mood. I'm always elevated. So to find something like that that you just really, really enjoy. But what I love about it is, who has fights in their head? Who tends to get triggered, and then you really start to get pissed off, and then have a litany narrative in your head about yourself or somebody else. That's a great way to know that you're triggered, is if you're dropping F bombs in yourself, or you're having a imaginary conversation where, I'm going to say this and I'm going to say that, then I'm going to say this, blah, 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 like that kind of a thing. That tells you you're triggered, and it might be a really good idea to find that thing that can get you out of it. Um, Another thing that calms your triggers is doing some rage work. That Nerf bat that I mentioned, that toddler bat, hitting your bed, hitting your pillow, but it doesn't work unless you use your voice. And if you're connected to your childhood trauma about the thing, let's just say you have a toxic boss that criticized you um, in a meeting publicly. And I would have the person go home and start to beat up their couch a little bit and say, F you and blah, 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 blah. I hate working here and you're just self righteous and blah, blah, blah. But then I would also sort of direct the person about, how was that true growing up? And what would you want to say your parents who set you up to be dealing with a toxic boss in that way? Hopefully that makes sense. It's a little bit tricky. Um, Hi, Patrick. Could you explain what holding the parents accountable looks like? Sure. Holding the parents accountable, I said that a lot in my videos. It doesn't mean confronting parents in person. It just means when that person gets triggered to the toxic boss that I just mentioned, doing some rage work, hitting the bed, hitting the couch, screaming into a pillow, holding the parents accountable is a sentiment that's like, look what you did to me. It's kind of it's almost like a cognitive behavioral kind of a thing, of really bringing your parents into the present upset. It's not blaming your parents. It's like, who struggles with people pleasing out there? And you people please and you're trying not to, then you end up hating yourself for doing that, or you exhaust yourself by saying you agree to something you didn't really want to agree to. Holding the parents accountable is really in our minds, like, you terrified me so much and you shame me so much that I'm a people pleaser now, and I'm going to grow out of this, but you set me up to never know how to say no to somebody. That's the accountability piece. It's just bringing into the room that our triggers, our beliefs, our stuck places, our really hard places in life, is our parents have a hand in all of that. In some way, we're responsible for doing the healing work, and we're responsible for doing all those things. But those things aren't just there in a vacuum. You're not born a people pleaser. You're not born getting into it with the barista or something like that. You're not born being terrified to say no to somebody. So hopefully I answered the question. It's a great. I'm glad somebody asked that question, because it is a confusing thing that I say. Get some tea. Okie dokes. Okay. Hi, Patrick. Can you give some examples of new traditions? Doing my first Christmas solo as an orphan of choice. Wow. Okay, cool. Or hard, and I appreciate that. And I can't think of something concrete to do this weekend. Um, Thank you, and wishing your family a gentle holiday. I think starting new traditions are really, really cool. I would just start really first with journaling with your inner child and letting them know that they're safe with you and that you're starting to become a family and doing things very differently. And you can ask them what they might want to do. And if you get stuck, just think about some stuff that like kids might want to do, like um, a very simple thing you can do is just kind of like walk around or drive around and look at Christmas lights from a place of being mindful. To make a food that sounds like kind of good to you. My son and I, just this past Thanksgiving, we started a tradition that Thanksgiving before is on TikTok. I saw this thing where someone mashed up a pumpkin pie, rolled it into balls, and then dipped those balls into chocolate, and then finished that with some whipped cream or something like that. So it's our new thing that we do, and I love doing stuff like that with him. But you can make a tradition any kind of like you want, even if it doesn't. You might sometimes a lot of us struggle with creativity, and a lot of us struggle with like I don't know, would I like this kind of a thing? So you might have to kind of fake it till you make it. What I really love kind of doing, it's very kid centric, inner child centric, is to sort of make those things that we used to make in school in childhood, like Christmas snowflakes, something like that. You fold the paper a couple times, like really kind of simple kind of stuff, and just kind of almost do it as an experiment to see what comes up for you with the inner child. Like, do they feel seen or taken care of? um, that kind of a thing. Watch a couple Christmas movies, watch, something like that. Um, and you can create a tradition out of anything. What's hard about it though is we're starting those traditions out of a place of grief. So it's okay if it's not like woohoo, it's okay if there's like some sadness. I'll never forget. I went no contact with my family, and then the first Thanksgiving away from them kind of came up, and remember that as the one of the hardest kind of like things I remember going through. I remember I actually just ended up making a dinner for one friend of mine, and we just kind of sat in my apartment and we ate this kind of turkey in a good enough way, and we got through it, but it definitely wasn't enjoyable. So just want to be kind of real about that. So appreciate that question. Moving on, when I make a mistake or just the thought I've made a mistake, my ears go red hot and I lose my breath from shame. Confrontation or the perception of it gets my heart racing, stomach and knots, and hands shaking, just like when I was a kid and I couldn't stand up for myself against my parental figures. How can I recenter myself during those moments? Where I would start is that body reaction. Um, Little kids feel that. Little kids feel shame in a very deep way. Even even kids who are actually in healthy family systems. But the difference is in a healthy family system, the kid is probably going to get some help with it. When we grow up the way that we grow up, it's just we're just alone in that. And then that shame, and I remember I relate to being like that. Does anyone remember? I think kids feel shame anyway, but traumatized kids feel shame in an amplified way. Does anyone remember like cracking a joke in the fourth grade and then it bombed? Or you asked a question and it seemed silly and you still kind of toss and turn about it or something like that? Just remember like the blood dropping from shame and you just sort of like almost went into a little bit of an existential, like, oh, I just want the wall to swallow me up. So I think that's already coming from feeling like you're a terrible kid at home. So what I would do is to really kind of dialogue with my inner child about what it was like. The other thing I would really do is to almost honor that feeling of the ears going hot and holding your breath. Meaning to say, when I say honor it, it's sort of like, I know that you had to do that to just get through the thing. And I hate that our parents didn't help us or cause this thing because we just started to hate ourselves, which is what a lot of kids do. That's what most of this stuff is, everyone. When you're a kid not getting any help, children have a choice either to, and they make the right choice. We either choose doom, that we're in this family system in the 4th grade, that we're that kind of screwed and we're that up the creek, or we can start to hate ourselves. And hating ourselves really becomes the strategy that helps us kind of get through it. But the terrible thing about that is it stays with us into our adulthood. So to really kind of say to, to this inner child, of course you had to hate yourself because that's what you were told and that's what you came up with. And it's none of it was necessary or true. Um, and to start to kind of like almost undo the brainwashing that it's okay to make a mistake. Really, really hard. And I'm not going to say that those two ideas are going to fix it, but they're just most of these are just starting points. It'd be really, really good to be around other people, like in a group, and to be able to sort of have that trigger come up, but actually have it kind of be okay around other people. Because people don't, it's funny. I think most people don't want the over apologizing from us. Most people don't want to see us go to a really, really big self-hate place and that kind of a thing, you know? And it might feel, it's hard to know that because we're so consumed in our own triggers. But, I don't want that from people that I know. I don't want that from anybody who follows me or whatever. I just want them to be happy and be chill. I don't want them to feel bad in my presence about something that they did or they didn't do or whatever. Hopefully that makes sense. Um, let's see how we doing on time. Oh, I'm overtime. I'm gonna answer a couple more. I'm gonna have to go for a couple quick ones. Um, let's see. How can I have a good enough low conflict? This is a hard one. Low conflict relationship with my sibling who is stuck in unhealthy patterns and is unable to see the role in unhealthy patterns while I'm doing lots of work to overcome my own unhealthy patterns. How do I have a good enough low conflict relationship? This is a heartbreaking one because my answer is there's an elephant in the room. You're doing a lot of work. The sibling is stuck. There's probably unhealthy patterns in the family. And I would just kind of say that unfortunately, these relationships have to be a little bit superficial and a little bit awkward because it's not real. Like, it's not real intimacy. Like, if they're stuck in something and if you really can't talk to them about the greater family system or how bad the childhood trauma was, you're a little bit caught. And it's something that our inner adult can do. This is for everybody. Is the inner adult can tolerate superficial relationships, but the inner child is welcome to feel sad about them. I mean, this is our sibling. Most likely, we want our sibling to get healed too. We won't, unless they were a perpetrator and there's like bigger issues going on. Most of us just want our sibling really along for the ride of just breaking generational trauma and living our best lives and we want to go to the Cape with the sibling and the kids and still have, I think most people, it's almost like we want, maybe I'm speaking too much for other people, but we want that kind of chunk of family and save that chunk of family because our family is really, really important. Um, I don't mean to talk about it so flippantly or whatever, but it's just we come from families that are just non-workable. So it's just a really heartbreaking experience. But how can I have a good enough low conflict relationship? Don't bring up, this is what makes it awkward and this is what makes it superficial is that if you want it to be good enough in low conflict, don't bring up the real stuff. And there's some grief in that. I really wish I had a better answer. Um, so there's that. And let's see. I'm gonna go. I want to find a short question and just do one more. So let me get back into the form. See if I can find a quick one. Okay, what are reasonable expectations to have friends? What are common unreasonable expectations that come from trauma? When they lie on a spectrum, how do we recognize and shift expectations? I'm going to read the question again. What are reasonable expectations to have friends? What are common unreasonable expectations that come from trauma? When they lie on a spectrum, how to recognize and shift expectations? I think I know what you mean. Whether it's a friendship or a partnership, my thing went away. Different browser. I thought I lost you. Nope. Yay, you're all there. Whether it's a partner, whether it is friendships, when you're starting to do work on yourself or you kind of awaken to this stuff, it's really a lot of us spend a lot of time and it's like, is it me? Is it them? Is that healthy? I don't know. It's like we're really shooting in the dark. Um, I think that that's true for a lot of us. And um, I I had kind of a sounding board. I had a therapist and I had a group. And I think we all have to kind of spend time going like, yeah, I met this friend at work and then, you know what I mean? Like we kept talking about getting together on the weekend and have lunch and then that time came and then like last minute they ghosted me. They just said they had something else come up and I didn't really know. I needed the sounding board of someone kind of saying, well, you might have to give them the benefit of the doubt. You might just kinda have to try one more time, and if it you know what I mean? Like, first impressions mean a lot. First impressions mean a lot to me, but I learned that from healthier people because I just kept giving people chances. I don't know if I'm really answering the question on this one. What are reasonable expectations to have of friends? Okay, let me answer it in a different way. I would get so triggered if I felt that friends of mine weren't showing up for me the way that I thought they should. So if I had a friend, let's just say I remember in college I would like sort of like I might have a like an after semester party or something like that, like you know, like a sober party, just get together with the other students. And if I had 10 people coming to that party, the 11th person who was like, I don't think I'm going to make it last minute, that would trigger the mess out of me. And then I would really not know about the person. And that's just unique to me. We all have our own unique triggers. But I think that coming back to the sounding board thing, I needed help around people sort of helping with giving people the benefit of the doubt. What are some red flags? What are some green flags? And there's even still this whole other thing about like chemistry because you can start kind of having a friendship. It's a lot like dating. You're just trying to figure out coworkers, like you're into the same things. You watch but when you go hang out with them, it's really, really flat and it's really awkward. Awkwardness is something, it's telling us something. It's not bad. Awkwardness isn't bad. It just is what it is. So hopefully I'm answering their question right. It's just sort of, I really think that the answer is we grow up without being parented. We grow up getting no help about did you guys get any help from like, if you had a bump with your friend when you were 13 years old, did you get any help with that? That wasn't like, "Oh, what did you do? You should apologize." You know? So that's coming back to the family system. None of us really know where the line is, and I got a lot of help from a therapist and a group and sobriety and 12-step about healthy ideas about to try to figure out who's for me and who's not, what's appropriate and what's not. I went through a whole learning experience, but I couldn't have done that in a vacuum. I couldn't have done that just doing this. I really needed other people in my life that I learned from. They were like my teachers. So the expectations of friends. One thing that I'm reading into the question, last thing is like this comes up in my membership. This question this week, I think. Um, a lot of us, when we start a friendship, our inner child projects family and parents onto the friend. And that's what I was doing. So when a friend would cancel plans on me or something like that, or if I felt that they weren't being morally right or something like that, I would get massively triggered. Does anyone relate to that? Anyone do that? It's like you have a friend and you just like almost try to assimilate into their family. It's like the inner child has some boundary issues kind of going on with this stuff. So when we have a friend, it's like, how do we keep it just right sized into a friend when the inner child is might be looking for family or might be looking for a parental figure? So that's where another plug for inner child work is to sort of to um, really be the secure attachment for your inner child. That's what the function of the inner adult can do. Um, over time, so that we're not looking for that with a friendship, that we're not looking for that with a partner. So really kind of appreciate it. If you would like to know more about my membership, I'm going to put it into the chat right now. The membership that I do is it's live Q&As twice a month, but it's on Zoom and we can see each other. And that membership also involves a whole bunch of all the coursework that's on my website, and all upcoming webinars get kind of glumped into that. So every time I have a new webinar, that goes into the membership. And then there's weekly journal prompts that I send out to help people kind of connect with their inner child. And whether you join the membership or the other thing that I mentioned, let me put the dialoguing thing into the chat too. The dialoguing course, Reparenting the Inner Child. So this is the most of what I was talking about, the non-dominant hand and dominant hand dialoguing is all from that. It's a webinar that became a course. Let me make sure that I made it in there. And the membership, I've just added, I think, about 15 to 20 seats. And for the next 24 hours, I've also added a 15% off code. So if you want to try out the membership, that would be a good time to do that. Let me give you guys the code. When you go to the Gumroad thing, you just type in the code and this gives you 15% off. You could try the membership for a month, attend a couple of live Q&As, check out the coursework. So this code here gives you 15% off. All right. Whew, I've been talking a long time. Really appreciate your generosity. I didn't get a chance to kind of see them as they come up because I'm terrible at multitasking. I love that we all showed up for this. There's 730 of you. When did you guys get here? How about, before I go, any kind of quick questions, fun questions? No more trauma questions. I'm burnt out from the trauma stuff. Can't do the trauma 24/7. What do you guys, come back to that question? What do you guys want from the end of the year? What do you guys want for 2023? And I'm not talking about like, I want to lose weight or I want to stop drinking coffee. Like, what do you emotionally want for 2023? Happy Festivus. My favorite cookie. I like a lot of coffee. I'm a pretty much a coffee addict, and I don't apologize about that. I celebrate that. Coffee, cookies, that kind of stuff. A lot of chocolate. I'm not really a fruity kind of. My wife she likes fruity candy. I like the kind of chocolatey stuff. Family, peace, a hug. Oh, digital hug. Whoever that was. Delight. I want to join your group. Inner peace. Favorite Xmas food. I grew up on that meat and potatoes kind of stuff, so I just really kind of like I make I have a lot of Irish and English people in my family, so we like to make trifles. And another family tradition, I've been making tiramisu trifles. Go look it up. Tiramisu is probably like one of my favorite things, and you make a layered trifle thing out of it with like chocolate pudding and lady fingers and whipped cream. I used to work in restaurants, so I'm all about the food stuff. Digital hug to everyone here. Yes, absolutely. My website's crashing. Oh no. Well, it'll be all right somehow. I'm tech savvy, but I'm not tech savvy. The code doesn't work. Shit. Let me fix that then. All right. Was there a place that you could type in a code? My Authentic Self 2023. Let me make sure. Okay, give me 1 second and I will check out that code thing. But before I do, did the code work for somebody else? Okay. I'm getting some things that the website is sort of crashing. I tell you what, I'm going to leave that code up for 48 hours, for 2 days. So just kind of keep trying. Oh my God, I've crashed my first website. here. Well, okay. So, I tell you what. Here, I'm gonna put save this. This is my email address. Okay. If you can't use that code and you've tried a bunch of times, email me and I will fix it. That's probably the best thing that I can do right now. So grab that email address. Yes, the code works. Just test it. Thank you, James. Yes, a lot of traffic to a, to a website. I'm blown away with how many of you showed up. I almost like don't know what to do with it. I should be the guy that knows how to sort of trauma guy, like, oh, need to know how to take a compliment. I'm not that great at taking them, actually. I'll send you cookies. Oh, I would love that. Yes, mocha cookies. Absolutely. Thank you so much. It just worked for me in the monthly membership. All right. Well, I am going to sign off. I have totally loved this. I hope you all have a happy Festivus, a happy holidays. I love you all. Thank you so much for your generosity, for your super thanks. And if you had to dive off, this will be coming back up. I think that this goes directly to a YouTube video. And I'm going to go have some sweets and sit by a fire. Love you all. Thank you so much. I'm going to sign off and I will see you next time. Bye, everybody.